Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Marissa Kozlov. It's great to have you with us for today's eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests from all areas of media, ad tech, and MarTech. During today's conversation, we'll cover best practices to build and tap into resilient data sources so that your upcoming marketing efforts remain effective and privacy compliant. Now let's meet my guest. Joining us today from New York, we have Joshua Lowcock, president of Quad Media. Joshua, so nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Marissa.
Really happy to have you with us. And before you get started, I want to remind our audience that you're going to be sticking around for a live Q&A in the second part of the show. So to our audience, please keep it conversational with us. Just use the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen to tell us where you're joining us from today and also to submit your questions. We will do our best to get to as many of those live questions as we can in the second part of the show, so keep them coming. We have great content planned for you today. Joshua, let's get started.
Thanks, Marissa. So as Marissa outlined, I'm going to take you through building a resilient data strategy in a privacy-first world. I'm from Quad Media. I'm president of media at Quad. And let's get into the content. What we're going to go through today is 6 things. We're going to go through the state of cookie deprecation, what marketers can do, how you can look at different data collection strategies, what the most resilient path forward is. We're going to look at some case studies of brands that do it right and some questions you should be asking yourselves to be successful in your strategy ahead. As we go through this, I want to remind you that we're sharing the data strategy checklist for 2024. We have documents available on quad.com, and of course, there's lots of fabulous research on eMarketer. Let's set some benchmarks here. There's some interesting, facts and figures that come out. 75% of marketers still heavily rely on third-party cookies, but somewhat depressingly, almost 20% still say the deprecation of third-party cookies will devastate their business. This means we really need to focus on finding a solution and as marketers becoming more smart in the way we think about using data in advertising and marketing overall. If we look at the state of cookie deprecation right now, we know it's been coming forever. It gets delayed again and again and again. And while Google towards the end of last year announced that, yes, cookie deprecation was coming and they would be rolling it out to Google Chrome users at the start of this year, the CMA, the Communications and Markets Authority in the UK, once again put the whole debate in the spotlight, outlining 4 areas that Google needed to address before you could move forward. And that included ensuring that it didn't self-preference, that Google didn't self-preference its own services, addressing some specific privacy design issues with Privacy Sandbox, ensuring the long-term privacy governance issues were addressed, and assuring the things were set in place so that for the long term, consumers and privacy were protected, but also competition was protected. What I'd like to point out, and it's important to note, is it's not just Google Chrome that's deprecating third-party cookies. Microsoft Edge, which is built off Chrome's underlying stack, has also announced it's going to start deprecating cookies. So what I like to say is it's time for a reality check. This is not a stay of execution. Third-party cookies will die. We need to accept that, and as marketers, we need to adjust our strategy. The other things that we need to be focused on is the acceleration of protection of personal data. The White House passed an executive order restricting the sale and offshore use of data against countries that are broadly looked at ones that are enemies of the United States. And we have general laws from the US Department of State, Department of Justice issuing regulations or rulings looking at and examining the use of sensitive data. I'm going to look at some of these examples later because I think it's very important to keep in mind as you build your data strategy, as you think about the way you key and connect things together, are you doing it in a way that is not only in tune with regulations and the law, but also in the spirit and direction that regulators are heading? And of course, we've got the speculation on it if a TikTok ban is next. But let's look at US state-based regulation right now. Right now in the US, we have 13 state-based regulations. Something I always like to emphasize to clients and you should pay strict attention to. There's more than a number of websites right now that have a do not sell link down the bottom and explicitly only mention California privacy regulations. If you're doing that and not respectful of the fact that there's 13 other states that have privacy regulations that you need to adhere to and need to manage compliance and opt-out and consent processes for, you're doing it wrong. The other thing to keep in mind is there's 20 up-and-coming privacy laws in individual states, and that's not including all the other regulations you've got, such as HIPAA, COPPA, FCRA, the CAN-SPAM Act, and the like. even in the past 24 hours, Florida passed legislation to limit the ability of children under the age of 14 to use social media networks and to require identity and proof of age. The fact that this landscape continues to evolve is something that as marketers, we need to be particularly acutely aware of. The other thing is don't just focus on cookies. When we think about cookies, we're really talking about marketing and advertising. And one of the things we don't have an honest conversation about is ad blocking. So when you think about third-party cookie deprecation, you also need to be starting to think about what's the more intelligent and creative way to reach audience just holistically in a world of changing audience dynamics. 20% of consumers now block an ad while browsing the internet. 13% use privacy-safe browsers. 12% of consumers use search engines that don't track online activity, like Brave. These are great stats from eMarketer, and it's just a reminder to you as you think about your data strategy going forward. Regulation compliance is important. We're going to talk about what you should start collecting in a minute, but keep in mind that as marketers, your end goal is to get your ads in front of audiences. And when audiences are not only shying away and steering away from cookies, but you've also got challenges in just getting ads out there because they're blocking ads, what are you doing from a content and creative and a media perspective to really connect and resonate with audiences? The last thing, and this is really when we start thinking about building a resilient strategy, is from Quad's perspective, we also think it's not just cookies that are going to be deprecated. We expect email as an identifier will probably go away as well. And we're going to give you some reasons for that. But when you start thinking about a resilient data strategy and a resilient strategy in the world of third-party cookie deprecation, a lot of companies are pivoting to email. They're pivoting to email because that's seen as a keying mechanism or a single point of information that you can connect multiple user identities against to identify a single individual. The problem with all of this is email as an identifier is flawed with and fraught with risk, both technical and regulatory. If you look at the technical risks involved, email, like third-party cookies, like mobile device IDs, is easily deprecated by platforms. Apple's private relay service, if you use a iOS or Mac OS device, allows you to anonymize your email address and sign in with one that doesn't identify you as a unique individual. Apple's email service also blocks third-party cookies and tracking as by default, preventing you even knowing if your emails have reached an individual. Firefox has a similar product, and there's multiple third-party services available that are similar. Email's lack of transparency as well on data collection, as well as a consent mechanism, creates a whole lot of problems, especially if you look at it from a regulatory lens. The one phrase that everyone talks about when they're casting aspersions at the industry is surveillance capitalism. When you think about email, collecting a consumer's email address and then starting to use that to key them together and identify them across disparate services, can that be done in a transparent, consent-based way that a consumer can opt in and opt out of? The big thing to think about is if email is absolutely instrumental to logging in and out of your service, how are you actually going to be able to give consumers consent to opt out of using their email address for tracking and connecting things together? And we've seen the FTC already hone in and prosecute and issue fines against companies that do sorts of things like this. The last one is I would never rule out, and this fourth one is really important, is I wouldn't rule out that Google, the large provider of Gmail, and the fact that they use Google services to sign in and connect everything that goes on their platforms, it would be quite easy for Google to actually introduce its own anonymized service, instantly deprecating a whole swathe of Gmail addresses from the ecosystem. So what should you do as marketers? Let's look at what you can do to make your strategy resilient. The questions you need to be asking yourself is, are you data rich or are you data poor? And what this really means is not do you have a lot of data, but will your consumers actually share data with you? And can you actually manage the data minimization and compliance risks and the data regulation cost that comes with that? This statistic here is very important. While everyone will tell you you should start collecting first-party data to be resilient in a privacy-forward, cookie-deprecated world, 84% of Americans are concerned about sharing their data when interacting with brands online. So in a world where more than 3/4 of consumers are concerned about sharing their data, should you be running out there trying to capture everyone's data if consumers don't really want to share it with you? And then there becomes other questions of can you do it at scale and can you manage the meaningful relationships you need to provide when you do have that data. Let's talk about the data rich. If you're data rich, awesome, well done to you, but be mindful of compliance. Data rich companies should be thinking about sharing or partnering when you have data. And when I talk about sharing, it's not actually packaging your data up and selling it out there on the market. It's about finding people that share similar business interests and goals with you. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the coming slides to help them be more effective marketers, but also more effective people helping your business succeed. While a lot of marketers, about 80% say they have access to first-party data, to me, the concerning statistic is about 40%, so we're getting close to half, don't actually know how to effectively use it. And that's why I always recommend a little bit of caution on that collection of first-party data. The excitement to collect it is great, but if you don't know how to use it, all you're doing is creating organizational risk, compliance risk, and setting unrealistic expectations with consumers that now I have your data, but I'm not able to offer you personalized, relevant, or better experiences. So what on earth did I share my data with you for? But let's get back to the data poor, because these are the people that really need to help. If you're data poor, look at partnerships. Don't go chasing your own data. Don't look at things that aren't going to give you scale. And more importantly, if you really want to build, if you think building some sort of data is important, I'm going to emphasize the scale side of things, the resilient side of things, and the transparency and consent-based nature of it all. If you can't do that consistently on a recurring basis, you're going to be fraught with risk because, as we've seen, the FTC prosecute companies like Kochava for mobile location data and collecting data in sensitive locations, Publicis Health for the way that certain patient recordings were used in non-compliant matters, and Avast, probably the most worrisome of them all, an antivirus vendor who was collecting browser data and then selling it in the open market. So what you should be looking at is alternatives if you're data poor. There's one such alternative, which is Conversions API, commonly spoken of as CAPI. Conversion APIs involve you installing APIs in your platforms or secure handshakes in your website or other properties. Meta, Google, Snapchat, TikTok, and others have them. They're more reliable than third-party cookies, but they require technical work, integration, and they circumvent some of the challenges. On the positive side, they circumvent some of the challenges you experience with ad blockers and cookies being blocked by default. The issues, time-consuming, requires ongoing maintenance, and third parties get a little bit more control. So you're handing over the keys to the kingdom to the incumbent tech players. And what's really unknown with all of this is what will regulators decide. The reason why we had that previous slide on data-related litigation is if you're operating in a sensitive category, healthcare, financial services, banking and finance, insurance, and you're using a conversion API, you should be asking yourself, am I now inadvertently sharing sensitive consumer information back with one of these platforms, putting me in the crosshairs of regulators? And the FTC is quite active at investigating and issuing fines at present. There's other alternatives from companies such as the Trade Desk, but the concerns I have about that and what I would encourage you all to think about is, are you getting locked into a different version of a walled garden? Are you relying on a potentially deprecated mechanism, such as an email address, to identify and connect consumers? I'm not saying you shouldn't test, learn, evaluate these alternatives. What I'm saying is approach with trepidation, caution, and look at breaking down the silos in your organization to be more effective in the way you adopt and examine these strategies. And if you look across the spectrum, what you can and can't do, on the left-hand side, there's still opportunities to market to your own audiences. So CRM lists and your own customer data. So that first-party data strategy is key. But one of the things that we find particularly interesting is household addressable data, because household addressable data can't be deprecated. And we're going to talk about why that is a pathway to building the most resilient data strategy and what lessons you can learn from others who have been successful, especially the retail media networks, in looking at household addressable data. Contextual, absolutely critically important. Google's Topics API, so Google's solution around third-party cookies, is ostensibly a contextual-based solution. The IAB has the IAB contextual taxonomy. There's a lot of great companies in the contextual space. Again, evaluating contextual solutions is a smart strategy to look at when you're looking at alternatives to third-party cookies. Perfectly reasonable, perfectly fine. Don't get stuck on the obsession that you need to collect first-party data just to have a strategy to deal with third-party cookie deprecation. The lessons from the previous slides really are, if you think about CAPI, Conversions API, if you think about trade desk solutions, if you think about partnering with others, is be careful of building dependency or codependency on the walled gardens. We've seen them change the rules of the road again and again and again, or over-investing or over-reliance on black box solutions. AI, artificial intelligence, large language models, fabulous, amazing things will transform the world of advertising. But if it actually creates more of a black box that you don't know what's going on, you don't know your customers, that creates complications. It creates inability to optimize your media because all you can do is put more money in and out. You don't have control about how that data is used. And if everybody's copying and using the same things from these large incumbent platforms, how do you actually get a competitive edge and advantage in the market? This is why Quad's position is partner, partner, partner. Don't bet the farm on walled gardens. If you're data poor or data rich, look for smart, intelligent co-op type relationships you can have where there's synergistic relationships. And there are more resilient, lasting data strategies you can pursue. Retail media, the growth of retail media is not just driven by the fact that third-party cookies are deprecating. It's driven by the fact that retail media has transactional data and household ID. Household addresses are also enormously resilient. We all have only one place we call home. When you buy things online, you either take it home or get it delivered to home. This is why retail media networks succeed. It's a resilient data stack. It's not something that's going to be deprecated by other people. Resiliency means it can't be undermined by a platform player. You don't have to worry about Google changing the rules or Chrome changing the rules tomorrow. It's not going to be undermined by a tech player. You're not going to have Apple go, hey, we're all about privacy, and as a result of this, we're deprecating XYZ by the end of the year. And the last one is, and I just want to belabor that point, email. It can't be undermined by expected change in the ecosystem. Building your house on sand on your first-party data strategy isn't going to make you successful the long term. So partnerships are the better way forward, and looking at household identifiers is also a very smart strategy. What makes retail media resilient? Real people buy products, real data is attached to transactions, so performance is important, and real products go to people's homes to buy and sell and consume. The challenge you have to keep in mind, and not so much of a reason not to work with retail media partners, a reason why as a marketer you need to think strategically about the way you work with retail media networks is, saying things that we all know. You probably don't sell exclusively through one retail media channel. You don't want to give 100% of your budget to one retailer. But the third one, which not a lot of people think about, and I encourage you to, if there's one thing you take away from today, noodle on it for a bit. If you're buying retail media from, one of the major retailers, they're running ads for you to drive traffic to their website, and then they're running ads on the pages that you're driving to, that then drive pages, people to buy competitor products or products elsewhere on the site. Are you actually driving your own business, or actually are you just there fueling the retail media players' game? So just be, skeptical and keep an eye on that, because you don't want to be paying to arbitrage traffic for a retailer. We think retail media is great, but household data is the most resilient. We all have multiple laptops, phones, email addresses. Not a word of a lie. I have over 400 unique email addresses. Most people aren't crazy like me, but most people have 3 or 4. You have your work email address, your personal email address, and some sort of temporary disposable one that you use for that occasional one where the salesperson asks you for an email address in store. But for your home, you only have one place you call home. And home gives you a real insight into people. It tells you their people passions. If you tell me where someone lives, I can tell a lot about them. It tells you what matters in their community. And at the end of the day, that's where people shop. 70% of media is consumed at home. That number might blow your mind, but when you think about the fact that sample size of 1, you start your morning, you look at your phone, you're at home, you end your day, you look at your phone, you're at home, and you consume streaming media at home. That's why 70% of media consumption happens at home, and most purchases happen 20 minutes within home. So keeping home as that single source of truth is a really valuable strategy going forward. But let's look at who does all data activation really well and smart today. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Not all of them are necessarily Quad clients, but these are the companies that I think are doing it smart and well, and that you can learn a lot from if you want to be experts in activating or using data. The first example I'm going to give is Yeti. Yeti's approach is perhaps the most exciting one of everyone I've seen to date. So we're all familiar with Spotify's year in review, and that everyone copied that. And it's almost become boring and tiresome in terms of a way to use data and activate data in media. Yeti's strategy was uniquely different and very forward-looking. They did a year in preview. So Yeti makes those tumblers. They know that people that use Yeti products are outdoorsy types, interested in activities around the year. They actually provided potential customers a calendar where they could go through and map out their planned activities for, in this case, it was during 2023. That enabled people to have a forecast of events that they wanted to go and attend to. And it actually gave Yeti probably the most powerful thing, the ability to actually market in advance and know what customers were going to do and tailor their marketing strategy for the year ahead. So this is a great way of collecting data, but collecting data without having to collect a ton of data, apply AI and machine learning to do predictive analytics, taking something that people do, which is for outdoor events and activities, you do plan ahead because you know you want to travel, you know where you need to go, start collecting that data from people in the year ahead, and then use that to intelligently market. Very, very smart strategy. This Wolverine example is very important, and it's important for the reason that I spoke about before, that in the AI machine learning driven world where you're relying on black box algorithms, what's left for you to optimize? The only thing left for you to optimize as marketers, as we accelerate to automated marketing, is your creative elements. So in this example, Wolverine experimented with different types of creative based on their first-party data insights. So this is a different way of thinking about using your data. A lot of people think about using their data of how do I find the right audience and just hit them, on the media channels where I can find them the most effectively. Wolverine used their data to optimize and intelligently activate their creative. Another fabulous example here is SiriusXM. SiriusXM's strategy is appealing to me because there was a couple of things that they did very, very smart. One of them was they looked at bridging the world between offline and online very intelligently. So when you think about household level data and the fact that, most people consume SiriusXM in their car because that's just the way of the world, they both did a direct mail product, but they warmed that direct mail product with a synchronized digital advertising campaign. The other thing that they did very intelligently, and from a data collection and data strategy perspective, and perhaps visible on the screen right now, is they had a QR code both on the direct mail piece, plus also on the ad creative itself. That made it easier for people to interact and engage with the ad, and then provide a pathway to collecting first-party data. And I want to just land on this for a little bit longer, because the other thing to take away from this is making it frictionless and easy for people to share data back with you is also just as important. So if you do decide to collect data, don't go crazy. Don't ask 1,000 questions. Don't make it complicated, hard, require registration, and a million other things. Frictionless experiences are the smarter way to drive conversion, response, and collection of data going forward. In this last example, can't name the specific advertiser, but the graphic should give you enough of a hint. A leading global sneaker brand looked at the way of actually finding an alternative way to collect data when their existing first-party data strategy was maxed out. So this is an interesting one, especially if you've got a direct-to-consumer play out there. They knew their CRM data was almost effectively maxed out. They knew there was only limited things that they could do to engage. They needed to find different ways to collect data and activate and encourage people to re-engage with their brand. Not only did they launch on new media platforms to start collecting data, they also looked at new data activation and collection points. So SMS was a key part of that strategy. Taking this holistic view of customer relationship data is really, really important. And the reason why it's important is it can help transform your marketing strategy by breaking internal silos. The number of clients and marketers I know that have a CRM team that sits isolated from marketing, sits isolated from legal, and runs its own distinct, email strategy, divorced of all other things going on in the organization, I could count on both hands, and I'd need extra people in the room to keep counting. Legacy CRM silos are not the best way to transform and build a resilient first-party data strategy and be resilient in the world of third-party cookie deprecation. You end up with information silos, data silos, and marketing silos. True data-driven organizations have to break down and bring together operations, marketing, legal, commercial, and product all in the same room. I'd like to think that there's a lot of people on this call who are marketers, but if you don't come away from this call and go, look, the next meeting we need to have is I need to get my legal, commercial, operations, and product team all in a room so we all actually have a unified strategy going forward, you're doing it wrong. Because that's the way you will actually gain the right insights into consumer behavior. You'll tailor the best personalized experiences, and you'll also get a sense for the risk appetite in the organization for collection and use and partnerships when it comes to third-party and first-party data. So in the final takeaways from today, what do we need you to know, or what questions should you really be asking? When it comes to data and building out your resilient, data strategy, always ask how and from and whom is data sourced. Truly know your partners. If someone says in an email, hey, we're privacy compliant, or hey, we're CCPA compliant, don't take it on face value. Push, prod, probe, find out what's really going on. Actually truly understand what compliance is. If someone says, oh, yes, we have ability for people to opt out on our website, are they actually obeying the spirit and intent of the laws? A lot of people say the word compliance, but they're not compliant in the spirit and intent of the laws, and that's where the FTC starts investigating and issuing fines. And then think about, can you manage the compliance requests? Can you scale? Would partnerships be a better alternative? And are you building a resilient strategy? But if there's one last takeaway before we get to the Q&A, and I'd love for you to ask questions, I'm happy to answer any and all of them, is yes, look at shoring up your first-party data strategy, whether that's in-house or partnerships. Conduct that data privacy audit. Reassess. I said partnerships 100 times already. Reassess all of those partnerships. Build an aggressive test and learn strategy. Don't shy away from CAPI. Don't shy away from Trade Desk and other partners, but actually test and learn. Don't throw all your chips in the circle and hope you're back to winner, because the rules of the road and regulators, moods change. And then the last one is, aside from attending webinars like this, work hard to stay on top of industry changes. There's a lot of great content on eMarketer. There's a lot of great content on the Quad website, but work hard to stay on top of industry changes, because what I tell you today is guaranteed to change tomorrow. But I'll hand back to Marissa in the studio for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Joshua. What a fantastic presentation. I mean, I learned so much about data privacy and, of course, data resilience, as you said. I think we all learned that you have 400 email addresses, which is quite impressive. That's a good takeaway. But really fantastic information, so many great data points. And thank you also for those fantastic case studies. It was great to see how, all of those brands put that all into action. I think you called it awesomeness in action, which I also really enjoyed. So thank you.
It was awesomeness in action.
It was awesome. Great brands right there. I just want to remind our audience that we still have time if you want to submit questions. As Joshua said, he is open to any questions you have. So please continue to submit those as we go through some of the questions that have already come in. All right, Joshua, the first one I have for you is, how do companies and organizations ensure the privacy of user data when collecting and storing it?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. There's a couple of things to think about there, which is you should have, the thing that I would be asking is, who is your Chief Information Security Officer? and what's the process you have for audit controls and data access rights to that information. So this is, again, when I spoke before about breaking down those organizational silos, and there was a miss on me, the technology team should be a key part of those conversations, because there's things that you need to keep in mind, which is what's the password process? What are the servers located? The server location is a particularly important one, especially with regulations limiting where you can store data on and offshore. But involve your technology team, your chief information security officer is the main one you should be talking to.
Okay, good points. Thank you. One of our viewers asks if you have any good examples of how to gather zero-party data.
Yeah, so I mean, aside from, the examples of awesomeness, the ones that I think have the most legitimate and the best way to collect that data is people that actually have a legitimate reason to have a meaningful relationship with consumers. And so the two examples I always give is if you think about retailers, retailers do that well because they have a legitimate reason to have a relationship with consumers. Picking a random example, let's say you're a shampoo brand. Shampoo brands don't have a legitimate reason to collect data from consumers. So I would actually, the answer I would give you is if you have a website that sells direct to consumers or an app that actually has a direct relationship with consumers, they're the ones who do it well. Everyone else is attempting basically to collect data, but without a real reason to do so.
Okay, thank you. Earlier in the presentation, you talked about the walled gardens. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the downsides of the walled garden approach? Is it just related to that questionable resiliency with future digital tools? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things on the walled garden approach, which is, yes, there's questionable resiliency in there. I do have a profound concern that if you're operating in sensitive categories, so the examples I gave before, banking, finance, insurance, and healthcare, if you're operating in those categories, you could inadvertently be leaking data back to those platforms, which would see you in breach with other regulations and services. The other part is working with those platforms doesn't actually circumvent your need to manage compliance and consent. So if you go, for example, if you go onto Facebook right now, regardless of what state you live in the United States, you can actually do a data subject access request and download your data. And that will list a whole host of companies that have, in air quotes, uploaded your data for advertising purposes. In my own examination and experience, when you start contacting those companies, all of them say they don't have data, but then can't explain why that audience data has been uploaded to Facebook, and therefore they're technically in breach with state-based privacy regulations. So you actually not only have a questionable resiliency, but you actually have created a whole compliance headache because now you could be breaking the law and not even knowing it. So those are things to be mindful of.
All right, thank you. Our next question is about surge CPM costs. How good are premium buys from certain publishers at surge CPM costs?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. Somewhere outside the scope of this conversation. I'm going to, let's just put a pin in that question for another time because search is a whole separate debate.
All right, sounds good. Well, our next question is about AI, which we know is a hot topic on every marketer's mind. Is AI a concern when it comes to data privacy, or is it still too early to know?
Yeah, so I love that question. There's a couple of things. So the first one is there's a lot of companies that, wave the flag of AI to sort of suggest that now they're privacy compliant or they offer anonymization because they're using AI. I'm immensely distrustful of that because that doesn't necessarily, like AI is not a panacea that solves privacy regulation and privacy compliance. I think AI creates potentially new headaches. The ability, well, I mean, it's been demonstrated already. AI can be immensely discriminatory. So one of the things I worry about from a data and a privacy perspective is, does AI inadvertently start creating discriminatory application of data, not because it's been directed to do so, but because the training set all the data that you've uploaded is inherently got some discriminatory factor in there that AI is now picked on, and now you've become a discriminatory marketer, even though that was not your intent. And then the third one for AI, which is why I gave that example of Wolverine with the creative optimization, is in an AI world, you're actually losing control of your ability as a marketer to really influence and drive the results that you need. So, and it's not that I'm, a Luddite and anti-AI, but every time there's a loss of control, there tends to be a loss of transparency. And when there's a loss of transparency, you end up in a world of compliance breaches, brand safety problems, ads running in unsafe or unsavory environments, ads being seen by bots. And the industry as a whole hasn't built all the safety and guardrails it needs around that. So AI is not necessarily bad, but be mindful of the compliance headache if it's unnecessary or discriminatory, and worry about, well, do I have any real control over my marketing budget? Am I just too trusting and I'm going to end up with some other pain point further down the road?
All right. Well, along the lines of compliance, our next viewer asks, with so many new regulations coming down the line or ones that are already in state review, what approach should marketers take to ensure full compliance on omni-channel cross-country campaigns?
Yeah, so let's pull that apart, because there's cross country and then there's United States. So cross country compliance, most people default to adopting GDPR as their compliance regime. But when we think cross country, there is a rest of the world out there. It's not just Europe and the United States. And Singapore, Australia, Thailand, Japan, they all have privacy regulations of their own. So what I encourage people to do is two things, which is, from a data collection and data minimization point of view, is look at the high water benchmark of what the most stringent rules are, and look to, if you want to be simplistic, consistently apply the high water benchmark. If you want to do it properly and studiously and well, what you should be doing is geo-detecting when people come in, clearly understanding what market a consumer not only lives in, but where they're connecting to or from your properties from, and manage compliance at an individual country level. For example, GDPR is an interesting one, because you could take the view mistakenly that, okay, I only need to worry about GDPR if I transact and operate in Europe. But the key takeaway from GDPR is GDPR applies to European citizens regardless where in the world they live or where in the world they're transacting from. So if you've got a European citizen visiting your website who happens to be living in the United States, your obligation is to be GDPR compliant, even though that consumer might be coming from downtown New York. So look at that, go for the highest level of compliance, but don't ignore international regulations simply because you think you don't trade or have customers outside your market. Geo-detect, make the right decision for that market.
Yeah, that's a great point, that they may be located elsewhere, but yet they're still European citizens. So thank you
And you
for
still have to comply.
right.
And
Thank you.
there
Thanks for
are
that
people
reminder.
there are people that will actively go out and seek to enforce, there's activists that actively go out to seek to enforce their GDPR rights outside of Europe to catch, large companies off guard.
All right. Thank you for that. The next question is about TikTok. We know that that company has certainly been in the news a lot lately. What other companies are potentially going to get more scrutiny around data privacy beyond TikTok?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I'd frame it in, a couple of parts, which is TikTok's up for a lot of, review because of its ownership by ByteDance, which is a Chinese-owned entity. So there's a geopolitical, part to that conversation. I think the other platforms that are under a lot of scrutiny, Google, Apple, and Meta, are immediately under scrutiny. Apple, there was a case filed only last week about that, which was, are they self-preferencing? Google gets looked at for self-preferencing, and Meta is being examined for the way its algorithmic feed works. To sort of break those down into layman terms, what's the real fundamental issue here is they have a lot of first-party data, or they're, air quotes, using the veil of privacy. And from a regulatory perspective, looks like they might be using that to enforce their market dominance or in any competitive position, which is why in the slide there where I talked about, be careful of getting too close and relying on things that could be deprecated or made less resilient. Leaning in on one of those platform strategy for cookie deprecation or overall data strategy could be a dangerous place to play, because if regulators start breaking them up or changing the way they can and can't or should share their data, you might find your whole data and marketing strategy unravel. But yeah, look at Apple, look at Google, look at Meta, keep a close eye on them. They're definitely in the crosshairs for the next 12 months. The other ones, not specific company, but the category of data that's absolutely fraught with risk right now is location-based data. That is a category, any company operating in the location-based space is going to be investigated by regulators in the next 12 months. I would bet solid money on it.
All right. Well, there's the crystal ball for certain companies to keep an eye out on and what may come. So keep an eye out to everybody. Thank you for that perspective. What are your thoughts on data clean rooms? These have, come to the forefront as a solution for leveraging first-party data in a compliant way. Do you think this is a fad, or is it something that you think is going to stick around?
So, I mean, data clean rooms play an important role in the ecosystem as a whole. And so that ensure everyone's on the same page. A data clean room is a place where two parties can exchange data in, a neutral, safe environment, enrich or otherwise, activate data against each other. I don't believe data clean rooms will go away. I think one of the things that's ripe for disruption in the industry as a whole is what I would call the data clean room tax. So every time you push data into a clean room, someone's getting paid, and that's usually the clean room operator. And that can make it immensely cost prohibitive to use and activate data. So data clean rooms in and of themselves won't go away, but the pricing and approach and the way that we use data clean rooms needs to be fundamentally reviewed and revisited. And that's why, again, the point I belabored 1,000 times is partnerships is a better strategy. It might be actually better to, I'm not going to say not to use a clean room, but not to use a clean room because clean rooms are important. But instead of defaulting to going, a clean room is the strategy I should adopt first, going, hey, look, does someone else have the same level of data probably about my customers anyway? Am I better off talking to them and partnering with them and just activating off the back of the data they have rather than playing a clean room tax to activate my data going forward?
Okay, we are going to take one more question today. What you talked about a lot of the regulation coming up. What's a good way to stay on top of all of these new regulations for ways that we can all stay compliant?
Yeah, so the things that I do, obviously, I go to eMarketer a lot, but the International Association of Privacy Professionals, they publish a very regularly updated landscape of both global and state-based regulations. They don't give legal advice, but if you're trying to sort of track the movements in the industry and what's, coming soon or pending or has been passed, that is, that's a really good first port of call. Well, the other one I'd say is make friends with the lawyers in your organization. Your legal team really should be your best friend in sort of understanding and navigating this space to make sure at the end of the day, staying abreast of the regulations is great, but you also don't want to be fined when regulations pass, and only your legal counsel can give you guidance on how to, minimize and what your internal risk organization's tolerance is to these sorts of issues.
All right, great tips there. Joshua, thank you so much for all this great content and, of course, for answering all of those questions from our audience. It was so great to have you with us.
It was great to be here. Thanks, everyone, for your time.
Yeah, before we wrap up, I'm just going to take a moment to share a little bit more about eMarketer's media channels. You can register for upcoming live analyst and Tech Talk webinars on our events page at emarketer.com/events. On the audio side of the house, don't forget to tune into Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast. And finally, please check out our newsletters. Thank you all for your time. And thanks again to Joshua, the team at Quad, our eMarketer studio team behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. We'll see you all on the next Tech Talk.